Hvad er det egentlig, der foregår i EU's institutioner? Hvornår det hele startede? Det er nogle af de ting, vi skal kigge på i den her video. Vi skal kigge lidt nærmere på den her forsamling, som svæver derude et sted bag horisonten, ude for almindelige menneskers opmærksomhed. For EU har fingrene med i rigtig mange ting, men vi hører sjældent noget særligt. Det er mest, når det er, at der ligger noget som for eksempel et muligt forbud mod vores lakridspiber, at EU får noget opmærksomhed. Og der kom dog også noget opmærksomhed omkring, at EU vil forbyde vores danske økomærke og erstatte det med et europæisk af meget ringere kvalitet. Det er ikke afgjort endnu. Til gengæld har man vedtaget et direktiv, som forbyder børn under 8 år at puste balloner op og bruge truthorn uden en voksens opsyn. Man har desuden også vedtaget et direktiv, som nu ved lov siger, at vand ikke forebygger dehydrering.
Det her er en artikel, som ligger op på finans.tv2.dk. Den hedder Krumme agurker og farlige balloner. Dette har EU lovgivet om. Her i artiklen vil man kunne se nogle af alle de mærkværdige regler, som der under tiden er blevet lavet i EU, eller i hvert fald et lille udsnit af dem. Og det kan være meget underholdende lige at sidde og se noget af det. Der kan vi blandt andet også finde den, hvor der står, at vand ikke forebygger dehydrering. Her er en artikel, som ligger op på politikken.dk, hvor man kan læse, at det danske økomærke er truet. EU er parat til at forbyde det røde økomærke på økovarer og erstatte det med EU's. Man vil også kunne læse i artiklen, at EU-kommissionen netop nu er ved at gennemgå reglerne for økologi i Europa, og indtil nu har bestræbelserne således ført til en udmelding om, at man ikke vil acceptere, at medlemmerne har et offentligt logo, der konkurrerer med EU's økoblad.
The UK has always enjoyed a very open market. Products have been allowed on the market if they're safe, period. There's not been any restrictions on the dosage or the type of product so long as it's safe and poses no risk to public health. The European Directive on Food Supplements changes that completely, and we're going to lose over 300 different nutrient forms. On top of that, there's going to be dosage restrictions, so the 1,000 milligram vitamin C tablet that we've been selling for 40, 50 years, that also will become illegal. So the safe and effective products that we've been used to in this country for decades are going to be illegal for no other reason than Europe wants to harmonize legislation. We are one of 3 countries with an open market in food supplements. We're going to lose our products by the 1st of August 2005.
Man skal ikke bruge meget tid på at undersøge EU, før man virkelig får fornemmelsen af, hvordan det er, at de godt kan lide at putte ens mærker på alting. Alt skal gøres på samme måde, vel og mærket deres måde. Jeg læste for ikke så lang tid siden en artikel, som virkelig fik mig til at overveje, hvad er det egentlig, der foregår i EU.
Inde på arbejderen.dk læste jeg så den her artikel, EU's formand i lommen på storindustrien. EU's nedskæringer aftalt med industrilobby. EU's største industribaroner har på et lukket møde fortalt EU-kommissionens formand, hvordan de ønsker, at kommissionen skal styre EU-landene i en mere industrivenlig retning. Nu er industribossernes planer ved at blive virkeliggjort. Og i den her artikel vil man kunne læse op til flere interessante ting. Og man vil blandt andet kunne læse, at det viser sig, at et af industribossernes hovedkrav på mødet var, at EU's nedskæringspolitik ikke blot skal fortsætte, men også gøres mere gennemslagskraftig. Man vil også kunne læse lidt om bankunionen og om, hvordan Tyskland har krævet EU-lovgivning om reformkontrakter gennemført, og hvordan at det med Tysklands krav om sammenkædning af de 2 ting kan en dansk deltagelse i bankunionen også betyde en accept af at indgå kontrakter med EU-kommissionen om reformer på arbejdsmarkedet og af socialpolitikken. Og her til sidst i artiklen under overskriften forhåndsgodkendelse af finanslov kan vi læse, hvordan det er, at EU også har en tæt styring af økonomien i EU-landene, og hvordan de skal sende deres finanslov til godkendelse og eftersyn i EU-kommissionen. Her kan vi lige få Barrosos kommentar, som han gav, da han præsenterede EU-kommissionens krav til ændringer i 13 af EU-landenes finanslov. Det handler ikke om, at kommissionen forsøger at styre de nationale økonomier i stedet for regeringerne. Det handler også om at sikre, at hvad der er godt for individuelle medlemsstater, også er godt for den europæiske union som helhed.
Ja, jeg synes i hvert fald, det er for uroligende læsning. Og det viser lidt om, at Europa måske ikke er helt præcis det, som mange ellers gik og troede. Klippet vi så lige før var fra en dokumentar, som hedder The Real Face of the European Union. Lad os tage et klip mere derfra og kaste os ud i, hvordan det hele begyndte.
The need to unite Europe grew understandably out of the devastation left behind after 2 catastrophic world wars. Of all the empires, it was perhaps the Nazis who came closest to pulling off the military conquest and occupation of Europe in recent times. In June 1940, Hermann Göring, Reich Marshal of the German Luftwaffe, reviews final plans for Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Great Britain. He also discusses with Hitler a new plan to unite Europe, not just under the conquering hammer of Blitzkrieg, but through a lasting political and economic union, which the Nazis named Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, or the European Economic Community. In 1942, a conference is held in Berlin to discuss this political and economic integration of Europe. Of all the nations targeted, Britain has proved the wild card because she alone has successfully resisted invasion. Rising to his feet at the conference, Nazi economist Professor Horst Jecht of Berlin University firmly declares that Britain is the greatest obstacle to Germany fulfilling her historic aim of dominating Europe.
Den europæiske union startede officielt i 1951 som det, der hed det europæiske kul- og stålfællesskab, eller på engelsk The European Coal and Steel Community, men har siden da udviklet sig til meget mere end det. Som vi også hørte i det foregående klip, talte man allerede tilbage i Nazi-Tyskland i 1940'erne om at lave en europæisk union, som man ville kalde The European Economic Community. Lad os prøve at se lidt mere fra samme klip.
The Allied answer to military stability in Europe was to be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which came into existence in 1949 as a permanent defense alliance for Europe. The European Union officially began life as the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, a modest industrial cooperation between France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg and Holland. 6 years later, in 1957, the Treaty of Rome was signed by the 6 participating coal and steel community nations. Declaring its goal as the ever closer union of the peoples of Europe, the Treaty of Rome went far beyond launching just a common market. It established the fledgling apparatus for an idealistic new superpower. This new entity was given an existing and unsettlingly familiar name: the European Economic Community.
Som vi hører i klippet, så blev Romtraktaten 6 år senere til virkelighed, og gennem den her traktat skabte man en ny supermagt, som fik det alt for velkendte navn, The European Economic Community. Altså præcis samme navn, som Hitler og Göring ville give deres Europa. Vi skal nu høre lidt fra en video fra en svensk mand, som hedder Henrik Palmgren, som har en interessant video liggende op på YouTube, som hedder EU, The Hidden Roots of the European Union. Og vi skal se 2 klip. Det første her, der snakker han lidt om nazismen og dens mulige forbindelse til Europas oprindelse, eller den europæiske union. Og det andet klip, vi skal se, handler om den misforståelse, der er blandt mange folk, at Europa er noget, som blev udtænkt efter 2. verdenskrig, da det i virkeligheden var udtænkt lang tid forinden. Krigen var bare en undskyldning for at gøre det.
Chilling side note, EWPA, aka also known as the Red House Report. Adam Labor uncovered US military intelligence reports that stated that top Nazis secretly met at the Maison Rogue Hotel in Strasbourg, that's that again, on August 10th, 1944, knowing Germany was on the brink of military defeat, conspired to create a Fourth Reich, a pan-European economic empire based around the European common market, a European common market. Top Nazi industrialists were ordered by SS Obergruppenführer Dr. Scheid to set up front companies abroad and pose as democrats in order to achieve economic penetration and lay the foundation for the re-emergence of the Nazi Party. Oops. So what's the official version of the European Union? In the ruins after World War II, obviously, the idea is that the European Union emerged as a kind of from the ashes as a natural reaction. This is to prevent further carnage in the world, primarily on the European continent, that suffered the most from the world wars. But the most fundamental misconception about how the European Union came into being stems from the myth that this intellectual genesis emerged after the Second World War. All the essential ideas which lay behind the moves to unite Europe at the time had in fact been conceived in the 1920s, before the rise of Hitler. But officially then the world wars are the excuse, if you will, to create the European Union.
Når vi så nu kigger på EU, så er det også nærliggende lige hurtigt at kigge på, hvad er det egentlig EU koster Danmark. For Danmarks medlemskab i EU koster Danmark penge, og det koster Danmark rigtig mange penge. Og det har kostet Danmark rigtig mange penge i rigtig lang tid. Lad os prøve at se lidt på nogle af de her artikler, som viser, hvad det har kostet for Danmark, i hvert fald sådan rent kroner og øremæssigt.
Her er en artikel. EU koster Danmark kassen. Den ligger på dr.dk. Her kan man læse: samlet løber Danmarks tab på medlemskabet op på 7 milliarder kroner om året, når man gør op, hvor meget vi giver, og hvor meget vi får igen via fonde og støtteordninger. Og artiklen er fra den 25. januar 2011. En artikel fra 2012, november. Danskere betaler EU's dyreste kontingent, og den ligger op på ekstrabladet.dk. De næste 7 års EU-budget volder problemer, og Danmark vil gerne betale lidt mindre. Se, hvor meget landene fik eller betalte i 2011. Og i den her artikel vil man kunne blandt andet se en liste, de har opgjort over, hvem der har betalt og hvem der har modtaget penge i budgettet her. Og man kan se hele EU's budget for de næste 7 år, som er på lidt over 8,1 billioner kroner. Det er altså et 8-tal med 12 nuller bagved. Og det er så vel og mærket det budget, som vi er med til at betale gennem vores kontingent. Inde på euoplysning.dk vil vi kunne se den her lille opgørelse her. Hvilke lande er nettobidragsydere i forhold til EU's budget. Den nedstående tabel viser EU-landenes nettobidrag til EU's årlige budget for perioden 2000 frem til 2012. Opgørelsen er udarbejdet af kommissionen, og det skal bemærkes, at opgørelsen af hvilke lande, der er henholdsvis nettobidragsydere eller nettobidragsmodtagere, kan opgøres anderledes med andre beløb som resultat. Men hvis vi lige tager et kig på, hvad det er, de i hvert fald er nået frem til der i kommissionen, så kan vi også se, at Danmark har et ret stort minus bare på den 12-årsperiode. Her er der også en interessant en inde på internetpartiet.nu, hvor man har taget nogle af alle de her tal og ligesom lavet nogle grafer over dem og opgjort det i noget sådan lidt mere nærværende. Og her overskriften: hvad koster EU Danmark og dig? Alle lande i EU betaler til projektet, men nogen modtager mere end de betaler. I 2011 kostede EU-projektet Danmark 6.240 millioner danske kroner, en pris som er stigende. Det svarer til 1.122 kroner per dansker, eller 2.377 kroner per dansker i beskæftigelse, eller 4.754 kroner for en familie med 2 voksne i arbejde. Og man vil blandt andet kunne se en graf hernede, hvor man vil kunne se nettosaldoen for Danmark gennem tiden, og hvordan den er stærkt faldende. Og der er et kort, der er opgjort over, hvem der betaler og hvem der modtager.
EU'en, som vi er bekendt, og heldigvis fristes man til at sige, ikke er medlem af, i hvert fald ikke endnu, har både tilhængere og modstandere her i Danmark. Men hvad ville der ske, hvis det var, at vi gik med i EU'en? Det kan være svært at svare på helt præcis, for det ville påvirke os på rigtig mange måder. Men vi kan tage et kig tilbage i historien til den gang, hvor Storbritannien stillede samme spørgsmål. I oktober 1990 valgte Storbritannien at gå med i det, man kalder The European Exchange Rate Mechanism, og derved låse pund til euro, i et forsøg på at se, hvordan det ville påvirke Storbritannien at være med i euroen. Der fulgte 23 måneder, hvor i Storbritannien oplevede den værste recession i 60 år.
And then there's the euro. Joining it will be irreversible, according to Hans Tietmeyer, former president of the German Bundesbank. Monetary union is a path of no return, he states. No subsequent revision or withdrawal of any kind is either legally or politically provided for.
Britain's economy traditionally tracks that of the United States because of our heavy trading on the dollar. So what would be the effect of joining the euro and tying Britain's economy into this one-size-fits-all arrangement with the other nations of the EU?
Brussels wanted to know too, which is why in October 1990 Britain joined something called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, a dress rehearsal for the euro and monetary union, which effectively locked the British pound into other EU currencies. 23 months of chaos followed. British business suffered its worst recession in 60 years. 100,000 UK businesses went to the wall. Unemployment doubled from 1.5 to 3 million. More bankruptcies were filed than in any previous 2-year period ever. Repossessions of property increased 7-fold. By 1993, over 500,000 of us were at least 3 months in arrears on our mortgages. Britain lost estimated reserves of 68 billion sterling.
And as someone once put it, you may be very friendly with your neighbours, but would you actually hand over complete control of your bank account to your friendly neighbours? Quite probably not. And that's precisely what we would be doing if we joined the euro.
Medlemmer af Europaparlamentet vælges af folk i de respektive medlemslande og kaldes for MEPs, den engelske forkortelse for Member of the European Parliament. Som de også fremhæver i dokumentaren The Real Face of the European Union, så er der mange folk, som har skrevet og protesteret mod det ene og det andet til deres folkevalgte MEP'er. Men gør det nogen forskel? Kan en folkevalgt MEP gøre nogen forskel i den her store maskine, som er EU? Jeg vil spille nogle klip for jer her, hvor nogle MEP's vil fortælle lidt om Europaparlamentet og hvad det vil sige at være MEP.
So what are MEPs for? Well, I'll tell you. MEPs are here to vote, and to vote often and to vote regularly. Sometimes we vote up to 450 times in the space of 80 minutes. Now, I have to confess, hands up, I don't know what's going on half the time. I haven't even read all of the documents, so massive are they. Now, it could be that my fellow MEPs down there are all Albert Einsteins and all absolutely understand what's going on. But I suspect that's not the case. In fact, it's rather like paying monkeys, because what happens is the civil servants draw up the list, and if it's vote number 58 and the piece of paper says vote yes, you vote yes, and if it's number 59 and it says vote no, you vote no. It is an absolute farce. It is a complete sham masquerading as democracy. Okay. In 15 minutes' time, we have to go down to the European Parliament and to fulfil our function as members of the European Parliament, which means we have to vote. So what we're about to do now is, with our assistants, who've done a massive amount of reading and work behind the scenes, they are effectively going to tell us what to do. Look at it. Look how many votes there are. What have we got? Yeah. So there's about, in fact, now look at that. This is a classic example of EU voting. There we have 40 individual different amendments that we're expected to vote for en bloc. Now I defy any man or woman down in that chamber to understand all those 40 amendments and make a balanced decision. It's just impossible.
For instance, the basic principle that one Westminster Parliament can always change what the past parliament did. That's the core of democracy, that you can elect a new parliament and then you can have a new law. This core doesn't exist in the EU, and it doesn't exist with the constitution we are building now.
This is the Strasbourg Parliament. It was built in 1999 at a cost of £300 million. It is open for only 4 days every month. What happens at the end of that 4 days is we load our offices into tin boxes, and then lorries arrive downstairs and drive the whole lot nearly 300 miles up to Brussels, where the boxes are unpacked for the next 3 weeks when we're supposed to be there, and then it's all brought back again. This whole process of shifting the administration and the staff from one home to another is costing the European taxpayer over 100 million euros a year.
The political aim is to develop the framework for a real European Union constitution, and in my opinion this means building up a European federal state.
And the other point, of course, is the sheer financial point, that this place is thick with institutional corruption. You could now buy a cheap airline ticket to come to Strasbourg for about £45 return. When you get here, you're reimbursed nearly £800 for the cost of that flight. Now, this has been going on for the last 20 years, and of course what's happened is that our members of the European Parliament simply haven't been talking about it. The system is fraudulent, it's rotten to the core. In 1998, a man called Paul van Buitenen, who worked in the European Commission, decided that fraud, waste, mismanagement, corruption and nepotism had become so bad that no longer could he hold his peace, and he went public and became the first whistleblower. It turned out that in fact all of his claims were right, and the entire European Commission were forced to resign in disgrace. The president of that commission, Jacques Santer, is now here as a member of the European Parliament for Luxembourg. And Commissioner Kinnock, who was one of the 20 that had to resign, is now a vice president of the European Union and has been put in charge of sorting out fraud. Well, how well has he done? Well, there's now another whistleblower. Her name's Marta Andreasen. She went to Commissioner Kinnock. She said, look, I'm sorry, Commissioner Kinnock, but I cannot sign off these accounts. You're using a cash-based system. You're not using double-entry bookkeeping, which incidentally was invented in the late 14th century. She said, I cannot sign off these accounts as being a true and accurate record of the EU's finances, and for her trouble, she's been suspended pending an investigation. Everybody talks about reforming fraud within the European Union. I think this whole system is so rotten that it's now unreformable.
There are 8,500 more words in the new text than in the old one. But since they had the instruction from Sarkozy to make a mini treaty, the Council was then instructed to change the font so that they have less space between the lines, and now they have managed to have 8,500 more words and 62 pages less. So that way we can make a mini treaty. It's not a very sympathetic way the European Council have worked in this case. They took a political decision, they made a political agreement among prime ministers that this text should not be put for referendum anywhere. Then they tried to avoid it in Ireland. They realized it was not possible because your courts in this country are still too independent. Congratulations to that. Because you say no, that what is published until now, what is signed by the prime ministers, is a text they have never ever read. Never. Why? Because it can't be read. This is not a treaty. This is 300 pages of amendments to 3,000 other pages of treaties. And you can only read it if you take one amendment by one and then look it up in the existing treaties and insert it. We will do that job for you, so that you will have a reader-friendly edition that's possible. They have decided in the Council that it's not allowed for any institution in the European Union to print a consolidated version which can be read before it has been approved in all 27 member states. This is a decision. The European Parliament we agreed unanimously in the Constitutional Affairs Committee that we wanted a reader-friendly edition, a consolidated version, which could be read unanimously. We will not have it, because higher powers decided we cannot have it. This is an instruction from some prime ministers. They do not want the text to be read. The order is sign, read afterwards.
I det sidste klip med den danske MEP Jens Peter Bonde så vi ham snakke om Lisbon-traktaten og om, hvordan man opfra i EU havde bestemt, at man ikke måtte trykke en sammenhængende og læselig version af traktaten. Det lyder jo lidt underligt, at folk ikke skulle kunne få lov til at læse det her, før det er, at lovene ligesom bliver vedtaget. Men alligevel så er det ikke første gang, at sådan noget lignende er sket. Da man tidligere skulle underskrive Romtraktaten, som vi også hørte om tidligere, så var man ikke blevet færdig med traktaten, og den var ikke blevet printet. Derfor så endte det med, at man i stedet for at aflyse ceremonien fortsatte, og derfor så underskrev 6 landes ledere en traktat, som udover en forside og en bagside bestod udelukkende af blanke sider.
How Divided Europe Came Together. En artikel, som ligger op på news.bbc.co.uk. Og i den, der vil man kunne læse lidt om, hvordan Romtraktaten blev til. Men Henrik Palmgren har også et klip fra BBC i sin video, som jeg har omtalt tidligere. Så jeg synes bare, vi skulle se det.
Let's look at another clip in terms of the signing of the Treaty of Rome. Keeps on doing that, sorry about that. There we go. Signing of blank pages.
You sometimes hear Eurosceptics complain that signing up to the European Union is like signing a blank cheque, which allows Brussels to draw as much power as it wants away from Westminster. Well, that could be closer to the truth than anyone had imagined, according to some evidence uncovered by our colleague Alan Little. Alan's been making a Radio 4 documentary to mark the 50th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, and he's uncovered some intriguing details about what really happened 50 years ago.
The governments were able to say to their electorates, oh, this is purely economic. And we knew there was never any secret that the end was political.
They laboured for 9 months, transforming themselves into a new kind of officialdom. These were the first of the Eurocrats. And they set a certain, now familiar tone. They worked beyond the gaze of public scrutiny, often in secrecy and without reference to public opinion. They gathered in Rome in such haste that the Italian state printer had not met the deadline. The treaty was not printed. And so, in great ceremony and solemnity, 6 heads of government put their signatures that day to a treaty that was, apart from the title page at the front and the signature page at the back, composed entirely of blank pages. Pierre Pescatore from Luxembourg was one of the lawyers that wrote the treaty.
They signed a bundle of blank pages. The first title existed in 4 languages and also the protocol at the end. Nobody looked at what was in between.
They didn't show that to the television cameras, and the European train that pulled out that day is still rolling.
Sometimes I like to compare the European Union as a creation to the organization of empires. The empires. And because we have the dimension of empires. But there is a great difference. The empires were usually made through force, with a center that was imposing a diktat, a will on the others. And now we have what some authors call the first non-imperial empire. We have, by dimension, 27 countries that freely decided to work together to pool their sovereignties, if you want to use that concept of sovereignty, and work together to add value. I believe it's a great construction, and we should be proud of it. At least we in the Commission are proud of our union.
Can I add a sentence?
Manden, vi lige så i klippet her, hedder Barroso, og er en af Europas 3 præsidenter. Sjovt nok kender folk ikke rigtig så meget til de her præsidenter, og endnu færre vil kunne genkende dem på gaden. Og det er jo lidt underligt, hvis man tænker på, at de er præsident for så stor en organisation, som EU er, som har så stor indflydelse. Men ikke desto mindre har EU's 3 hovedinstitutioner hver en præsident, og de er som følger. Det er Martin Schulz, som er præsident for The European Parliament. Så har vi Herman Van Rompuy, som er president of the European Council. Og så har vi José Manuel Barroso, som er president of the European Commission.
Og herinde på europa.eu kan man se et billede af de her 3 præsidenter. De her 3 præsidenter er på ingen måde folkevalgte. Det er måske også en af de grunde til, at folk ikke rigtig ved så meget om dem. Man vil blandt andet kunne se perioden, ligesom ud fra Barroso står der januar 2010 til december 2014. Men som vi så kunne se i det foregående klip, så har han altså også siddet før. Så det er ikke ensbetydende med, at de kun sidder i den periode.
Som sagt, så har de her 3 personer en utrolig stor indflydelse, og alligevel så er det overraskende få, som ved, hvem de er. Lad os prøve at tage et kig på Barroso, som jo var ham, vi så i det foregående klip, snakke om Europa som et imperie, og hvor glad og stolt han og kommissionen i hvert fald var over nedbrydelsen af national suverænitet, og hvad det her imperie ellers vil og har bragt med sig.
What the European Union is. And so who is, in that sense, José Manuel Barroso? He's a former head of actually the Maoist student. He was a student leader for the Maoists, rather, under the Portuguese Workers' Communist Party. Here he's talking to the cameras down there. Again, the future EU Commission. We're talking about the revolutionary movement pretty much here in that sense. I mean, look at the symbolism here as well. Obviously, of the Communist Party in Portugal. The star again, the 5-pointed star that we mentioned, talked about before. The hammer of industrialism or warfare, if you want to look at it that way, and the sickle of Saturn, or of death, Kronos. On the surface, I think we could say that the church, the Roman Church and communism are arch enemies in that sense. It might be ridiculous to claim that these 2 sides are on the same page, but I say that they're opposites. This is just a different mentality of how to implement the philosophy, pretty much.
Der kunne vi i hvert fald høre noget om, hvilken mand Barroso han var engang. Lad os prøve at tage et klip af en noget nyere tid, hvor han i Europaparlamentet bliver udfordret på sin demokratiske legitimitet af Nigel Farage.
Mr. Barroso, the recent WikiLeaks storm has led to mixed feelings, with some people saying, well, transparency is good, and others saying perhaps they'll damage international diplomacy. But I was particularly amused by the references to you in WikiLeaks, where it talked about your trip to Russia and the fact that you were ignored and excluded, and the Russian view from upon high that you were nothing more than a glorified international civil servant. Well, Mr. Barroso, remember, we've discussed this before here, and I've pointed out to you again and again that you have not been directly elected by the people, and you therefore have no real legitimacy. Is it that the fact you're unelected is the reason why you don't command more respect on the global stage, and why increasingly the peoples of Europe are holding you and the entire Commission in contempt?
Thank you. Mr.
I would
President.
not expect you to find a common line with the Russians, because that's what you are suggesting, that you agree with them. Frankly, I mean, I was elected by this Parliament, by secret vote, so I think I deserve the respect of this Parliament from all members of the Parliament. And I think in the European Union of democracies, 27 democracies, it's a reasonable way to elect a President of the Commission, because we are not a state, precisely, and I'm sure you will not be in favour of a European unified state. Since we are not a unified state, it's not a direct election of a President of the European Union. We don't have that. We have a President of the Commission. You may like it or not. I like him more than you, but okay. But in fact, I have been elected by this Parliament, and there is a President of the European Council that was designated by the heads of state and government. This is the way we are. I think it's a democratic way of handling the diversity of the European Union, and I think that if others do not respect our institutions, at least I hope the members of the European Parliament will respect the institutions we have in the European Union.
Additional question.
Well, Mr. Barroso, I enjoyed that enormously. The fact that you can stand up and boast about the fact that you were elected in secret and that somehow this gives you democratic legitimacy is the most bizarre concept I've come across in my entire life. The fact is, it is the Commission that has the sole right to propose the kind of legislation that is damaging Europe's economies in the way that it is. Are there any circumstances, sir, in which you think the peoples of Europe should have a referendum so that they can decide these issues?
Ja, han er altså valgt ved hemmelige stemmer, og på ingen måde valgt af folket i Europa. Men det er han tilsyneladende også helt tilfreds med. Lad os tage et klip mere her, hvor Nigel Farage han går Barrosos kommission lidt igennem.
President, Mr. Barroso says, I think my team is of high quality. Well, let's conduct a human audit. Now, I'm mindful that audits aren't very popular in the European Commission, and that auditors, if they do their job properly, get fired, but nonetheless, here goes. From France, we have Mr. Jacques Barrot. He'll take on transport. In 2000, he received an 8-month suspended jail sentence for his involvement in an embezzlement case and was banned from holding public office for 2 years. From Hungary, we have Mr. Kovács. He'll take on taxation. For many years, a communist apparatchik, a friend of Mr. Kadar, the dictator there, and an outspoken opponent of the values that we hold dear in the West. His new empire will produce taxation policy, and he'll look after the customs union from Cork across to Vilnius. Are the EPP and British Conservatives really going to vote for that? From Estonia, we have Mr. Kallas. For 20 years, a Soviet party apparatchik, until his newly acquired taste for capitalism got him into some trouble. Though, to be fair, he was acquitted of abuse and fraud, but convicted for providing false information, and he's going to be in charge of the anti-fraud drive. I mean, you couldn't make it up. From the UK, we've got Peter Mandelson. He'll take on the trade portfolio. He, of course, twice was removed from the British government, yet, to be fair, he's one of the more competent ones. From the Netherlands, we've got Nelly Kroes. She'll take on competition. She's accused of lying to the European Parliament. Now, these may only be allegations, but they're made by Mr. Van Buitenen, and I think should be listened to. Ask yourself a question. Would you buy a used car from this Commission? I mean, the answer simply must be no. But even if they were competent, even if this was a high-quality Commission, and sorry, Mr. Barroso, but I don't think it is, even if it was a high-quality Commission, we would still vote no on the political principle that it's the Commission that is the guardian of the treaties, that it's the Commission that is the motor for integration, that it's the Commission that initiates the legislation that is damaging our businesses across Europe so badly. It is the Commission that is the embodiment of all that is worst in this European Union. It is the Commission that is the government of Europe and is not directly accountable to anybody. And please, when you vote, take note that 20 of these commissioners have already said that they intend to attempt to implement the Constitution even before it's been ratified by Member States' governments. In the face of such breathtaking arrogance, nobody in the Independence and Democracy Group will vote for this Commission. Thank you.
Tolerance er et koncept, man nu er begyndt at bruge i EU i forbindelse med et ønske om lovliggørelse af overvågning af EU's borgere. En uafhængig gruppe af tidligere statsminister og premierminister i Europa har opfordret EU til at etablere en overvågningsenhed, som skal overvåge EU's borgere, som er under mistanke for intolerance. Hvad det så helt præcis betyder, det giver de ingen definition på. Så det lader mere til at være endnu en fribillet, som kan gradbøjes til at dække nærmest alt, man bestemmer sig for.
Inde på 180grader.dk kan man under overskriften "Skal EU til at overvåge intolerante borgere?" blandt andet læse, at European Council on Tolerance and Reconciliation, der er en uafhængig gruppe af tidligere europæiske statsoverhoveder og premierministre, har opfordret EU til at etablere en overvågningsenhed, der skal overvåge borgerne i alle 27 EU-lande, der er mistænkt for intolerance. Inde på infowars.com vil man også kunne læse lidt om det her. Der har de en artikel med overskriften EU set to monitor intolerant citizens. Controlling social behavior, proposal could ban criticism of Islam and feminism. Og inde på Europaparlamentets hjemmeside vil vi så kunne finde det her dokument, som beskriver alt det her, som de godt kunne tænke sig at indføre i forbindelse med begrebet tolerance. European Framework National Statute for the Promotion of Tolerance. Og hvis vi bladrer ned til side 6 her, der står en masse interessante ting i den her, men her der står der blandt andet: There is no need to be tolerant to the intolerant. This is especially important as far as freedom of expression is concerned. That freedom must not be abused to defame other groups. Og det de siger er jo så, at de ønsker at begrænse ytringsfriheden. Det skal være forbudt at udtale sig intolerant, hvad det så en helt præcis vil sige. Men det er jo så noget, som de kan bestemme, hvad der opfattes som intolerant. Og det gør jo også, at man kan nærmest overvåge alle, som man har lyst til, fordi at det er ikke noget med, at folk skal være anklaget, de skal bare være mistænkt for intolerance.
It's the true story of Europe. It's the story the politicians don't want you to hear, because it shows how they've deceived us and betrayed our nation. Only in 1994 did Chancellor Kohl's foreign policy spokesman, speaking on behalf of the ruling party of Europe's dominant nation, Germany, clearly reveal the true plan. The plan is to create a federal European superstate. Into it will be merged up to 25 ancient European nations, including our own. This new country, called Europe, will have one parliament, one government, one court of justice, one currency, one flag, and one anthem. That has been the plan all along. But those who favoured it knew the people of Europe would never accept it. They would never willingly surrender their freedoms to become just a province in a vast European superstate. So what did the politicians do? They conspired to keep the truth from the people.
I klippet siger han, at op til 25 lande vil indgå i unionen. Men i dag består Europa af 28 medlemslande, så man havde åbenbart større ambitioner end som så. I dag har vi kigget lidt på den side af Europa, som man ikke normalt hører så meget om. Men for mig stiller det her flere spørgsmål, eller i hvert fald lige så mange spørgsmål, som det besvarer. Og nogle af de nærliggende spørgsmål er som for eksempel Barroso og de andre eurokrater. Hvad er deres ønske for det her imperium? Hvor langt vil de tage det her imperie? Et andet spørgsmål kunne være i forbindelse med alle de her ting, som vi har hørt. Hvorfor bliver der ikke snakket mere om det i de almindelige medier? Og når nu vi hører sådan en artikel i starten, hvor det er, vi kan se, at industrilobbyen har dikteret nedskæringer, eller i hvert fald ønsket det, og det ser ud som om, de får det og har fået det. Og når de så siger, at det skal fastholdes og gøre mere gennemslagskraftige for at gøre Europa mere industrivenlig, så må det, de siger mellem linjerne, vel næsten være, at de vil også have presset lønningerne ned. Det er i hvert fald det, jeg ser som en stor del af det, de mener, når de vil gøre os mere industrivenlige. Så kan det stille en andre række spørgsmål, som for eksempel det, vi hører lidt om i nyhederne også for tiden, at man snakker om social dumping, hvor vi kan se Claus Hjort for eksempel stå og forsvare en timeløn på 40 kroner og sige, det er ikke social dumping.
Inde på altinget.dk vil man kunne læse en artikel med overskriften Hjort afviser at kalde 40 kroner i timen for social dumping. Man vil blandt andet kunne læse, der findes eksempler på, at udenlandsk arbejdskraft i Danmark kun får 40 kroner i timen, men Venstres tidligere beskæftigelsesminister Claus Hjort Frederiksen afviser at kalde 40 kroner i timen for social dumping.
Der er mange ting, som jeg slet ikke har haft tid til at berøre i den her video. Vigtige emner som bankunionen og nogle af de frihandelsaftaler, som er i gang med at blive forhandlet. Alt sammen noget, som vil fratage os mere og mere af vores i forvejen svækkede suverænitet. Men uanset hvor mange spørgsmål jeg nu engang kunne blive ved med at stille til det her, så har jeg valgt at stoppe her. I hvert fald for den her gang. EU er for mig noget, som engang kunne have udviklet sig til noget godt. Men i dag er så korrupt, at vi alle bør tage truslen seriøst omkring, at det her det rent faktisk kunne gå hen og udvikle sig til en ny fascistisk superstat. Lad os slutte af med at se flagceremonien for Strasbourg, hvor de hæver det europæiske flag til den europæiske nationalsang.
Detachment! Halt!